Once upon a time, before anything else existed, there was only darkness, an endless, quiet, empty space. But within this darkness, there was a spark of something extraordinary, a miraculous power that we've come to know as God. God looked at the vast expanse of nothingness and decided to fill it with life and light. With a single command, God said, "Let there be light," and just like that, light filled the emptiness, splitting the day from the night. Next, God crafted the sky, a beautiful blue blanket that covered the world. After that, He called forth the land and the seas. He painted the land green with plants and trees and filled the seas with all types of creatures. Then, God filled the sky with birds, the land with animals, and the waters with fish. Each creature, unique and special in its own way, added color and life to the world. But God wasn't done just yet. He wanted to create something even more special. So He fashioned humans in His own image. The first two, Adam and Eve, were placed in a paradise called the Garden of Eden. They lived in perfect harmony with nature, taking care of the earth and all its inhabitants. Yet in this perfect world, there was one rule. God told Adam and Eve not to eat from a certain tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But a cunning serpent tricked Eve into eating the fruit, and she shared it with Adam. It was the first act of disobedience, the first sin. Suddenly, the world was no longer the same. Adam and Eve were sent away from the Garden of Eden, and the balance was broken. But even in this sad moment, there was still a glimmer of hope. For God loved His creation, and He promised to find a way to restore the harmony that was lost. And so, from a world of perfect harmony, came the first act of disobedience. In a time when people forgot about being good, there was one man who stayed true. This man was Noah, a simple yet righteous man who walked with God. Unlike others in his time, Noah was different. He believed in kindness, in love, and in doing what was right. And because of his unwavering faith and good heart, God chose him for a very important task. God saw how the world was filled with wickedness and decided to cleanse it with a great flood. But He wanted to save Noah and his family, the only ones who still held goodness in their hearts. So God gave Noah detailed instructions to build a massive ark. This wasn't just any boat. It was a gigantic vessel, large enough to hold Noah's family and a pair of every animal species on Earth. Can you imagine the enormity of this task? Building an ark of such magnitude was no easy feat, especially since Noah was not a shipbuilder by trade. But Noah, being the obedient man he was, did not question God's command. He got to work, trusting God's plan. As Noah and his sons labored day and night, people laughed and ridiculed them. But Noah never wavered. He continued to build, and as he did, he preached about God's impending judgment, hoping to turn their hearts towards righteousness. Yet his words fell on deaf ears. After many years, the ark was finally complete. Now came the next task, to gather a pair of every animal species. Elephants, lions, birds, insects, you name it, they were there. It was a sight to behold, a menagerie of creatures, large and small, entering the ark in an orderly fashion, as if guided by an unseen hand. No sooner had the last animal entered, the heavens opened up, and it began to rain. It rained and rained for 40 days and 40 nights, until the entire earth was covered in water. But inside the ark, Noah, his family, and all the animals remained safe and dry. Finally, the rain stopped. Noah waited patiently until the water receded. He sent out a dove, which returned with an olive branch, signifying that dry land had appeared once more. With gratitude in their hearts, Noah and his family stepped out onto the freshly cleansed earth. And after the rain stopped, a beautiful rainbow appeared in the sky, symbolizing a promise never to flood the earth again. This rainbow was more than just a beautiful spectacle. It was God's promise to Noah, and to all of us, that He would never again send a flood to destroy the earth. The story of Noah and his ark is a timeless reminder of obedience, faith, and the promise of new beginnings. After the flood, people began to multiply, and they had a big idea. There was a time when everyone on earth spoke the same language, using the same words. They came together and decided to build a city with a tower that reached the sky. a tower so tall it would make them famous and keep them from being scattered all over the world. Their ambition was as high as the tower they aimed to construct. They wanted to reach the heavens, to touch the sky. But this was not just about building a tower, it was about human pride and arrogance, about trying to be equal with God. However, God saw what they were doing. He saw their city and the tower they were building. He understood their intentions and was not pleased. God knew that if they achieved this, nothing they planned to do would be beyond their reach. So, he decided to intervene. He went down and confused their language, making it so they couldn't understand each other. Imagine trying to pass bricks to your friend, but he doesn't understand what you're saying, or asking for a hammer, but no one knows what you need. That's exactly what happened. The construction of the tower came to a halt. People couldn't communicate, they couldn't understand each other, it was chaos. They had no choice but to stop building. They were frustrated, confused, and lost. The people had no option but to scatter. They went in different directions, spread out across the earth, taking their new languages with them. That's why the tower was called Babel, because it was there that God confused the people's language and scattered them across the world. The ambition to reach the heavens resulted in a world full of diverse languages and cultures. It taught us a lesson about pride and ambition and the consequences of trying to be equal with God. And so, the people spread out, speaking different languages, all because of a tower that was too tall. In a far-off land, a man named Abraham received a very special message. Now, this wasn't just any ordinary message. No, this was a call from God himself. Abraham, a man of great faith, was living in the bustling city of Haran. He was surrounded by the life he had always known, family, friends, and familiar surroundings. But one day, God spoke to him, asking him to leave everything behind. Can you imagine leaving your home, your family, your life, all at the request of a voice you've never heard before? It would take immense trust, wouldn't it? But Abraham did not hesitate. This is where his faith really shines. He trusted in God's word, even though it meant leaving his home and venturing into the unknown. He packed up his belongings, gathered his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot, and they set off on a journey guided solely by their faith in God's promise. Now, this promise, it was not a small thing. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. That's right, many nations. This meant that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky or the grains of sand on a seashore. And not only that, but God promised to bless those who blessed Abraham and to curse those who cursed him. This was a significant promise, a covenant made by God to Abraham. Abraham, already 75 years old, could have doubted this promise. After all, he and Sarah were not young, and they had no children. But Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. His faith did not waver, even in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. The journey wasn't easy. They traveled through many lands, facing numerous challenges. But through it all, Abraham's faith remained steadfast. He built altars to God wherever he went, a symbol of his unwavering devotion. He trusted in God's promises even when they seemed distant and unattainable. This story of Abraham is a story of faith, of trust, and of obedience. It's a story about answering a call, even when that call leads to uncertainty and upheaval. It's about holding on to a promise, even when that promise seems impossible. Abraham's faith in God set the foundation for a lineage that would shape the course of history. His descendants, as numerous as the stars, would go on to include kings, prophets, and ultimately the Messiah. All because one man was willing to listen, to trust, and to obey. And so Abraham, with faith in his heart, set off on a journey to a land he didn't know. His story reminds us that sometimes faith requires us to step out into the unknown, to trust in promises yet unseen, and to believe in a plan that's bigger than ourselves. Abraham's calling, his journey, his faith, they are a testament to the power of trusting in God's promises, no matter how improbable they may seem. One sunny day, Abraham had some unusual guests. They weren't the usual sort of visitors you might expect. No, these were three strangers who seemed to appear out of nowhere, under the hot, shimmering sun. Abraham, being the kind and hospitable man that he was, didn't hesitate at all. He rushed from his tent to greet them, bowing low to the ground in respect. He invited them to rest under the shade of a nearby tree and insisted they wash their dusty feet. While they rested, Abraham hurried back to his tent and told his wife Sarah about their unexpected guests. Together, they prepared a feast. Sarah kneaded fine flour and baked fresh bread, while Abraham selected a tender, juicy calf from his herd. He had it cooked to perfection, serving it with milk and curds. As they ate, one of the visitors asked about Sarah. Abraham replied that she was in the tent. Then the visitor shared a surprising piece of news. He said that when he would return the following year, Sarah would have a son. Now Sarah was listening from the tent, and she couldn't help but laugh at this. She and Abraham were old, well past the age of having children. It seemed impossible, a wild dream, but the visitor was serious. He asked why Sarah laughed and doubted, reminding her that nothing is too hard for the Lord. Sarah was afraid and tried to deny that she had laughed. But the visitor knew the truth, and sure enough, despite their old age and the odds, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. They named him Isaac, which means he laughs, a fitting reminder of the surprising news they had received that sunny day. And so, even in their old age, Abraham and Sarah were blessed with a son, just as the visitors had promised. A seemingly impossible promise delivered by unexpected visitors became a joyous reality, proving that with faith and hospitality, extraordinary things can happen, even on the most ordinary of days. So, you see, these aren't just stories, they are lessons for us all. As we draw the curtains on our journey through time, let's take a moment to reflect on the remarkable tales we've shared. Each story, a pearl of wisdom, each character, a beacon of faith, and each event, a testament to the power of obedience and trust in divine guidance. In the beginning, there was nothing but a void until the Creator breathed life into the universe. This tale of creation is not just about the birth of the universe, but also the birth of obedience. Adam and Eve's story reminds us of the importance of obeying divine commandments, of the consequences of straying from the path laid out for us. The story of Noah and his ark, a tale of unwavering faith in the face of ridicule and doubt. Noah's obedience to God, even when others did not believe, resulted in his survival and the renewal of life on earth. His story teaches us to hold fast to our beliefs no matter the odds. Then we have the Tower of Babel, a tale of ambition and pride. It serves as a reminder that while the pursuit of knowledge is noble, it must not lead to arrogance or defiance of divine will. Our journey then took us to Abraham, a man who left everything behind to answer God's call. His story is a testament to the power of faith and the rewards of obedience. His trust in God's promise, even when it seemed impossible, led to the birth of nations. Finally, we met Abraham's unexpected visitors, who brought news of a miracle. This story shows us that sometimes blessings come in the most unexpected ways, and that God's promises are always fulfilled, even if we can't see how at the moment. Remember, every story holds a lesson. So, what can you learn from these stories today? A long time ago, in the land of Canaan, there was a young boy named Joseph. He was not just any ordinary boy. Joseph was special, and his father, Jacob, loved him dearly. Jacob had 12 sons, but Joseph was his favorite. He even made Joseph a beautiful, multicolored coat, a symbol of his deep affection. But this favoritism was not without consequence. It stirred up a storm of jealousy among Joseph's brothers. They couldn't understand why their father favored Joseph so much, and this envy began to eat at them day by day. In addition to this, Joseph had a unique gift. He could see and interpret dreams, which were often symbolic and prophetic. One day, he shared his dreams with his brothers. He dreamt that their sheaves of grain bowed down to his sheaf in the field, and that the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. These dreams suggested that one day, Joseph would rule over his brothers, adding fuel to the already blazing fire of their envy. Driven by their jealousy and anger, the brothers made a drastic decision. They sold Joseph into slavery to a passing caravan of traders heading to Egypt. To cover up their deed, they dipped Joseph's favorite coat in goat's blood and presented it to their father. They let Jacob believe that a ferocious animal had devoured his beloved son. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Despite being in a foreign land and under harsh circumstances, Joseph did not lose hope. He held on to his faith and his unique ability to interpret dreams. This ability did not go unnoticed and soon caught the attention of Pharaoh himself. When none of his wise men could interpret his troubling dreams, the Pharaoh turned to Joseph. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams as 7 years of plentiful harvests followed by 7 years of severe famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom and insight, Pharaoh appointed him as the governor of Egypt. Joseph's primary task was to store surplus grain during the years of plenty to be used during the years of famine. When the famine hit, it was not confined to Egypt. Even the land of Canaan, where Joseph's family lived, was severely affected. Hearing about the stored grain in Egypt, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt unknowing that they were going to meet their brother, whom they had sold into slavery years ago. Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. After a series of events, Joseph revealed his identity. His brothers were terrified, but Joseph forgave them. He understood that everything that had happened was part of a larger plan. So, in the end, Joseph's dreams did come true. He did rule over his brothers, but more than that, he was able to save his family from a severe famine. Despite all the hardships, Joseph's faith and his ability to interpret dreams stood unwavering. And that, my friends, is the tale of Joseph the Dreamer. Despite all the hardships, Joseph's dreams did come true, and he was able to save his family from famine. In the land of Egypt, a baby boy was born during a time of great danger. His name was Moses, and he was born into a world where his very existence was a threat to the powerful Pharaoh. You see, the Pharaoh was afraid of the Hebrews who were growing in number and strength. So he ordered a terrible decree. All newborn Hebrew boys were to be killed. But Moses' mother loved her son dearly and would not let him be taken from her. She had a plan to save his life. She crafted a small basket, a tiny ark of bulrushes, waterproofed with bitumen and pitch. Into this cradle, she placed her precious son, trusting his life to the currents of the Nile River. Moses' sister Miriam watched from the reeds as the basket bobbed along the river, carrying her little brother towards an uncertain future. And then, something extraordinary happened. The Pharaoh's own daughter, bathing by the river, spotted the basket. Her heart was moved with compassion when she saw the crying baby inside. She knew he was a Hebrew child, but she didn't care. She decided then and there to protect him. And so, Moses, a simple Hebrew baby, was taken into the heart of the Pharaoh's palace. He was raised as an Egyptian, growing up amidst the splendor and luxury of the royal household. His mother, who was brought in to nurse him, must have whispered in his ear about his true heritage and the God of their ancestors. Over time, Moses grew into a man of strength and courage. He never forgot who he was or where he came from. And though he was raised in a palace, his heart was always with his people. This extraordinary journey of a simple Hebrew baby is just the beginning of the story of Moses, a man who would go on to lead his people out of slavery and into freedom. And that's how Moses, a simple Hebrew baby, grew up in the palace of the Pharaoh. One day, while Moses was taking care of sheep, he saw something extraordinary. Out in the wilderness, where the air is clear and the noise of the world is distant, a sight caught Moses' attention. A bush was ablaze. Flames leapt and danced. But here's where it gets unusual. The bush wasn't burning up. It was on fire, yet it remained unscathed, untouched by the flames. Imagine Moses' surprise. Even in the wilderness, where the unexpected often becomes the norm, this was something else entirely. He must have rubbed his eyes, maybe even pinched himself, but the sight before him remained the same. A bush, a flame yet unburned. Then from the midst of the fire, a voice echoed. It was deep and resonant, a voice like no other. It was God speaking directly to Moses from the heart of the burning bush. It's not every day you hear the voice of the divine, let alone from a bush that refuses to be consumed by fire. God had a mission for Moses. He asked him to do something big, something scary. He asked Moses to go to Egypt and free the Hebrews from slavery. Now, that's not an everyday request, is it? Moses, understandably, was reluctant. Who wouldn't be? It was a huge task, one filled with danger and uncertainty. But God, in his infinite wisdom and compassion, knew Moses' fears. He assured Moses that he wouldn't be alone. He promised to be with him every step of the way, guiding him, supporting him, giving him the strength he needed. Still, Moses had doubts. He wondered how he could convince the Hebrews that God had truly sent him. He worried about what to say, how to prove his divine mission. But God had an answer for that too. He told Moses his name, the holy name that is I am who I am. He told Moses to say to the Hebrews, I am has sent me to you. This wasn't just any name. It was a name that spoke of God's eternal nature, of his presence in every moment, of his power that transcends time and space. It was a name that carried weight, a name that would show the Hebrews that Moses truly spoke for the divine. And so, armed with this holy name and God's promise of support, Moses' reluctance began to fade. He was still nervous, of course. Who wouldn't be? But he was also resolute. He was ready to face the trials ahead, ready to stand up to Pharaoh, ready to lead his people to freedom. With God's promise in his heart, Moses set off to free his people. His journey would be long and hard, but he wasn't alone. He had God on his side, and with that he could face anything. Moses, the shepherd-turned-liberator, was on his way to change history. And it all started with a burning bush. When Moses asked Pharaoh to free the Hebrews, Pharaoh refused. This refusal was met with a series of events so incredible, so devastating, that they've been etched into the annals of history and are known today as the 10 plagues of Egypt. The first plague was the turning of the Nile into blood. Imagine the life-giving river, the heart of Egypt, suddenly running red. Fish died, the water stank, and the Egyptians couldn't drink from it. But Pharaoh's heart remained as hard as stone. Next came the plague of frogs. These weren't your everyday pond frogs. These were frogs that swarmed into houses, bedrooms, onto beds, into ovens and kneading bowls. But even after this amphibious invasion, Pharaoh reneged on his promise to let the Hebrews go. The third plague saw the dust of the earth turn into gnats that swarmed all over Egypt, covering men and animals. But Pharaoh remained unmoved. Then came the plague of flies. Thick, buzzing swarms of flies filled the houses and the land. Pharaoh promised freedom to the Hebrews, but when the flies were gone, he changed his mind. The fifth plague was a pestilence that struck down the livestock of the Egyptians. Cattle, horses, donkeys, camels, sheep, and goats all fell to this deadly disease. But still, Pharaoh's heart was unyielding. The sixth plague brought boils upon man and beast. These were not ordinary boils, but painful sores that broke out all over their bodies. Yet Pharaoh's resolve did not break. The seventh plague was a storm of hail such as Egypt had never seen before. It ruined the crops and broke every tree in the fields. But even this couldn't shake Pharaoh's resolve. The eighth plague was a swarm of locusts, which ate whatever the hail had left. They filled the houses and darkened the land. Once again, Pharaoh promised to let the Hebrews go, but when the locusts were gone, he changed his mind. The ninth plague was a darkness that could be felt, a darkness so thick that the Egyptians couldn't see each other or leave their places for 3 days. But even in this darkness, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Then came the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn. At midnight, every firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the captive in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle, died. This was the most devastating of all plagues, a heart-wrenching blow that finally made Pharaoh yield. Each of these plagues was a demonstration of God's power, a signal to Pharaoh and his people that the God of the Hebrews was not to be trifled with. They were also a test of Pharaoh's pride and stubbornness. showing how far he was willing to go to keep the Hebrews in bondage. But with the 10th plague, the unimaginable happened. Pharaoh's own son was taken, and the ruler of Egypt was brought to his knees. He finally understood the severity of his actions and the sheer power of the God he was defying. This marked a turning point in the story. Pharaoh, in his grief and fear, ordered Moses to take the Hebrews and go. The Hebrew people, who had been enslaved for generations, were finally free. They left Egypt with their flocks and herds, their dough without yeast, and with the blessing of the Egyptians, who urged them to leave quickly. With the 10th plague, Pharaoh finally understood that he couldn't stand against God's will. This was a hard-earned, painful lesson, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Hebrew people, a chapter of freedom and hope. As the Hebrews were leaving Egypt, Pharaoh changed his mind one last time. It was a decision that would seal his fate and that of his mighty army. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was anger, or perhaps it was simply the loss of a vast workforce. Whatever the reason, Pharaoh decided to pursue the Hebrews, to bring them back under the yoke of his rule. With chariots and horsemen, Pharaoh's army was a fearsome sight. The dust from their wheels filled the sky, and the thunderous noise of their approach echoed throughout the land. Fear gripped the hearts of the Hebrews. They found themselves trapped. On one side, the relentless pursuit of the Pharaoh's army, and on the other, the vast expanse of the Red Sea. The sea, while beautiful to behold, was a formidable barrier. There were no boats or bridges. The Hebrews were cornered, with no means of escape. But in that moment of despair, something extraordinary happened. Moses, the man chosen by God to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt, did not falter. He stood firm, his faith unwavering. He raised his staff towards the heavens and cried out to God. And then, the impossible became possible. The Red Sea, an insurmountable obstacle, began to part. It was as if an invisible hand was pushing the waters aside, creating a path where there was none before. Walls of water rose on either side, held in place by a force beyond comprehension. The seabed, once hidden beneath the waves, was laid bare. It was a path of salvation, a path to freedom. The Hebrews, with a mixture of awe and fear, began to cross. With each step, they moved further from the clutches of Pharaoh and closer to their freedom. They walked on dry land, flanked by towering walls of water, an experience no human had ever had before. Meanwhile, the Egyptian army, stunned by what they were witnessing, hesitated. But Pharaoh, driven by his obsession to reclaim his slaves, ordered his army to follow. Into the path between the walls of water they charged, their chariots rumbling over the seabed. But their pursuit was short-lived. As the last of the Hebrews stepped onto the far shore, the walls of water began to waver. Moses, once again raising his staff, signaled the end of the miracle. The walls of water collapsed, rushing back into their natural course with a roar that shook the earth. The Egyptian soldiers, caught in the torrent, were swept away. Pharaoh's powerful army, the pride of Egypt, was no more. The Hebrews, safe on the other side, watched in awe as the sea returned to its tranquil state, the turmoil of moments ago seemingly just a dream. But it was real. They had witnessed the power of God, a power that had delivered them from the mightiest ruler of their time. They turned away from the sea, away from Egypt, and towards their future. Their journey was far from over. They had a long way to go, a new land to find, a new life to build. But they were no longer slaves. They were free. And so, against all odds, the Hebrews were free, and they began their journey to the land that God had promised them. The crossing of the Red Sea was not just an escape from slavery, it was the first step towards their destiny. A destiny that would shape the course of human history.